Welcome to Internet Safety, hosted by Donna Rice Hughes. Over the next hour, you'll learn practical and crucial tips on how to keep your loved ones safe in the digital world. Now, here is Donna.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show, Internet Safety with Donna Rice Hughes, and that's me. I'm Donna. Today, we're going to discuss the tragedy of missing and possibly trafficked children at our southern border. First, let me say at the outset, the Enough is Enough is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose focus is to prevent the online exploitation of children. But we're just going to do a little bit of a detour because we've got a huge catastrophe, really, in our nation right now because of the past administration's open border policies. And we, as Americans, want to deal with these poor missing children, many that we believe have been trafficked, possibly by cartels and traffickers and others. And how do we deal with this? And so I have a very special guest here that does this around the world. But first, I want to begin with some data points before I introduce our guest, Tatiana. The House Homeland Security Subcommittee on Border Security and Enforcement held a hearing last fall. It followed a August report by DHS, Office of the Inspector General, Customs and Border Protection Agency. They found that they had encountered more than 500,000 unaccompanied children at the southwest border, compared to around 221 in 2017 to 2020. Now, there have been other reports, and you probably heard them on television if you have your TV on, but Reuters also said recently that they anticipate, or they've seen reported over 600,000 unaccompanied children. So I'm going to stop right there and introduce my very special guest, Tatiana Kotlyarenko. I hope I got that right, Tatiana. Tatiana is an international expert and speaker on violence against women and girls, and also human trafficking, which is what we're going to be talking about today. In response to the ongoing armed conflict in Ukraine, Tatiana conducted rapid assessment missions and provided recommendations on how to prevent and address the trafficking of Ukrainian women and children. Additionally, she works on issues related to sexual violence in areas of conflict and has done work around the world. In fact, she just said prior to us starting the show that she's just gotten back from Ghana, where she's doing some work, and is back where she lives in Switzerland. She has been the recipient, she's got a lot of awards, but I'll read two. The Last Girl Awards in 2022, and is also a member, or I think it's a member, did I get this right, Tatiana, of the BMW Responsible Leaders. So welcome, Tatiana.
Thank you so much, Donna. It's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss these very important issues.
Yes, and when I just met you not that long ago in February in Washington, D.C., we were both at the National Prayer Breakfast, and you came limping up with a knee brace on, and I asked you what happened, and tell our audience what you told me, because I want them to understand that you were really boots on the ground, girl.
Some investigations and that led to the rescue of kids out of a child brothel in West Africa, and subsequently I was coming out of my office and was hit by an SUV.
Wow. And you've had how many surgeries on that knee?
This was my fourth and hopefully the final one.
Well, good. Well, I hope you're doing better. You're brave and courageous, and you also just mentioned you just got back from Ghana. Tell us what you're doing in Ghana.
Assisting UNICEF and the Cybersecurity Authority as a consultant to develop guidelines on for industry on prevention of child online sexual exploitation and abuse. Great.
I mean, I'm just really amazed by what you've done and what you've accomplished in your young life. So thank you so much for joining us. Would you tell us a little bit about your work as an advisor on anti-trafficking issues at OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutes and Human Rights? from 2016 to 2023? Because that's quite an impressive run there.
Sure. So I was seconded by the US government, I'm American, to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the largest regional security organization in the world, composed of 57 governments and partners for cooperation. So the governments are all of North America, all of Europe, Central Asia, South Caucasus and such, and partners for cooperation include countries such as Australia, Japan, Israel, and such. So it's quite a big swath, and my job was specifically looking on the issues of protection of the rights of victims and survivors of trafficking, and providing technical support and capacity building for countries and such. And as part of that, I developed a variety of different tools or publications, one of which I've shared with you, that major book, which is the design of national referral mechanisms to protect victims and survivors of trafficking, which is a detailed framework on how countries can build successful and effective anti-trafficking frameworks, which also actually dealt with the issue of unaccompanied minors and accompanied and separated minors.
I'm glad you jumped right to it, because that's what we're here to discuss. And I want to just share with our viewers that I first met you because I was approached by someone working with this unmitigated challenge now of all of these children in our country that came across the southern border. And how do we safely and effectively and compassionately manage them, their lives, and so we know that Tom Holman is overseeing this, and again, someone who works with him reached out to me, and so I reached out to a number of people I know in the trafficking space, and I was connected to you, Tatiana, and you were just the perfect person, because what I want to talk about here at the beginning of our show is, what should Americans' response be? How big of a challenge is this compared to what you've seen and dealt with in other nations? And where do we go from here? So, but I want to go back a little bit to something I didn't cover from that Reuters report. Could you dig into that just a little bit more about what they have seen, what that Reuters report that just came out recently said about these children that have come into our country?
Well, they talk about the severe vulnerability of these children to a variety of different issues, including human trafficking and other forms of exploitation. When you have such a mass of children, which are not properly monitored and properly supported, you're going to have a massive issue. We have seen this issue all across the world, not just in US. There were reports some years ago when there were big waves of unaccompanied children coming in, for example, into Europe. Europol report 10,000 children missing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually a major challenge anywhere in the world, and US has a challenge of over 500,000 children that have entered the country, who have been given over to oftentimes unvetted guardians, which creates massive vulnerability. And both of us know this as well. Organized criminal networks, gangs like MS-13, they're quick to pick up on the fact that it is much easier to bring children in, exploit them, and such, and there's going to be very little follow-up or risk of these children being deported back.
Right. So we've got a big challenge on our hands, and I hope that this concerns everyone around the world, but especially Americans, because these kids are in our backyard, and now they're our responsibility, and we want to do everything we can to help them. And you've worked so closely with actual victims of human trafficking around the world. Before we get into the 4 pillars, the recommendation that I just asked you for a brief outline that I could give to the administration, I wanted for you to paint a picture for us, if you will, of what it's like, at least from what you've observed, for a minor child caught up in a situation like this, what do they go through? What can you even perceive, and I know you don't have a magic wand, that may have happened or be happening based on what you've seen in other countries and even here in America in this current situation we're dealing with?
So I want to start from the beginning of their journey. It's oftentimes separation from the community, everything they know, everything they love, everything that makes them feel safe, and being thrown into the unknown, a place of violence, threats, potentially sexual exploitation and such en route to wherever they're going. Sometimes they are fleeing from violent situations and from gangs, for example, but other times they're just being pushed to possibly be unified with some family members in other countries or for better life, quote unquote. The problem here is that this better life and getting there is a very dangerous journey. And once they arrive, if they're not properly taken care of, and by properly taken care of, as any other child, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have proper guardians, proper parental figures in place that ensure that these children are protected, that ensure that these kids are not being sexually exploited, that ensure these kids have sufficient food, clothing, and such, that control the environment that potentially seeks to exploit or endanger them. These kids are not much better off being exploited by MS-13 in US, for example, for sexual exploitation or to commit, criminal offenses than they are back home, being threatened and exploited by them.
Right. So we've, in that report that I mentioned, actually it was a congressional hearing of the subcommittee. I didn't bring everything into it, but what they found and what this report at Homeland Security discovered, and there were whistleblowers, by the way, a lot of whistleblowers that were speaking at this hearing. So this is all official records. I don't have it all in front of me, but it was really astounding to me that there had been safety protocols and mechanisms in place for who could sponsor a child and the processes prior to the Biden administration coming on to help to secure their safety. And many of those were just simply disregarded or not followed or completely disbanded. And which that combined with 4 years of these unaccompanied minors coming in, here we've got this massive situation now to deal with.
I have to talk about effective systems.
Good.
And effective systems are important because the issue is we've had unaccompanied minors coming in for a long time.
Okay.
Now, lengthy systems where unaccompanied minors are sitting in facilities are not the best solution. Fast-tracking systems to give unaccompanied minors, vulnerable children, to unvetted adults are unsafe and should not be used either. So it is about creating efficient systems that could provide proper checks within a certain time frame, which ensure the safety of that child. And that can be done. It needs to be properly resourced.
So what I'm hearing you say, and from the book you gave me, I don't have it in front of me because my suitcase would have weighed too much, and I would have had to pay more than to fit this book. But I mean, it was like this thick, right? That you helped to author, and so we're going to drill this down to the 1.5-page overview recommendation that you gave me, and what are the 4 pillars of what an effective system looks like. And I just want to caveat this back to something that I think that you were saying before, that it doesn't look like, based on what you're going to suggest, that we even had truly effective systems in place prior to now. Is that right? Even in the last 2 administrations ago.
I don't think we have had, the proper systems in place. And as I said, it's not to point a finger at US. I think pretty much almost everywhere the proper systems are not in place, which creates a compounding of the whole issue.
Right. Okay, so let's just dive into, why don't you walk us through what a comprehensive plan looks like and the keys to these four pillars? Because what we want, and we're going to ask our viewers and everyone that watches this, in the future, to support getting proper systems in place and help us get the message out and Tatiana to get the message out, because these lives of these children are at stake here, and we can prevent any further harm to a large degree, Tatiana, I believe, if we can get these systems in place. So why don't you walk us through it?
I mean, one of the things that takes a long time and creates an issue is fast tracking identity and age verification, family tracing, and such of unaccompanied and separated minors in countries of origin. So there need to be agreements signed. So for example, right now there being agreements signed and pushes to specific issues in a number of different countries, right? When we are talking about deportation of adults, non-cooperation, for example, has resulted with a particular set of consequences. Now, all of the systems in countries of origin can be, or at least where US has the relationship, can be fast tracked to ensure that their fast response systems when they're looking to identify children, including their age, and trace where their families are. So that's step one. But then it comes to initial identification and screening, right? During the initial identification and screening, there has to be a real time period within which these steps are undertaken. It cannot just go on for a year, 2 years, etc. And that would include things like verification of age, identity, and family status to determine if the child is unaccompanied, truly, or separated. There should be also immediate screening signs for trafficking, abuse, or any immediate health concerns through an integrated set of indicators which can be developed specifically for this population in US. And then this would also include providing temporary shelter and age-appropriate care in child-appropriate environments. And that actually has to be kept too, because this is how you also get the trust of the child, get the trust to the child to cooperate. If there were issues related to human trafficking, other crimes committed with the involvement of the child or towards the child, so that you could actually stop and break the back of these criminal operations. This should be actually then followed by immediate referrals and transfers, which would include things like medical care, psychological support, and educational opportunities for children. And when we talk about immediate referrals and transfers, meaning that the child is not stuck in a facility, it means that a proper system can be created, for example, as it has been in Florida, for example, for trafficked kids, Citrus. There are specific programs that could actually really ensure, with proper foster parents and such in place, that these children are properly taken care of, that these children are not disappearing, that these children are actually safeguarded. I know that there have been a lot of discussions as of the last week or so about legal representation for children, where at first it was canceled and then it was reinstated. And I believe that children should be appointed with a legal guardian within 48 hours and should be represented, because children cannot represent themselves. And that part will actually also help in prosecuting traffickers, smugglers, and those that are part of that journey for them. And then when we talk about deportation, it shouldn't be about deportation of children. Children should not be deported, but they should be reunified with their families if there's a feasible family in place, or be provided with alternate placements. And that should be done within 60 days. That should not be dragged out. As a child, and you actually asked me about the journey of a child, you're already scared. You want to be in a familiar, stable environment where you are safe. And that is a priority. So this is where a lot of times and everywhere that I have seen, family reunification is dragged out. I
Hmm.
believe that wherever a family is a feasible, safe environment, a child should be with their family. That is the best option for them, actually. Um, this is where it is important to design and develop effective models of care for unaccompanied and separated children. And for those who cannot be returned within the 60-day framework for a variety of different reasons. So once again, not institutionalized facilities, but proper care systems in place. There should also be continuing monitoring and support of children who have returned to their countries of origin. And what do I mean by that? Countries of origin should have social workers and child welfare professionals checking in on that child.
Right.
So it would require actual support of the national child care systems of countries of origin for these children. And the continuation of post-family reunification and reintegration efforts. So I know I'm drawing out a major system in place and
Right.
lots of different words, but essentially it boils down to this. Once a child is identified, there should be a time frame in which this child is reunified with their family, if that is feasible, and if not, put into a vetted, secure, and safe system in place, whether it is whether they are returned to their country of origin or whether there's a decision that because this child is a victim of trafficking or of other potential needs and such in place, this child will remain in US. But whatever the case is, this needs to be fast and safe and
Right.
child appropriate.
So right now, and maybe you know different than what I've heard and read myself as I'm just kind of watching from afar here in the media, but we don't know how many children have been recovered yet, and what systems are currently available because we're talking about a fast timeline. Where are they going now? In other words, let's just say, for instance, and I don't know this to be the case, I'm just going to pull out a number. Let's just say 5,000 kids, get found here in the next 3 months, all right? And what do we currently have, or do you know, that would fit into this model besides the particular facility or program that you mentioned in Florida? Now, I know there are a lot of great safe houses around the country, but I can't imagine that they can, start to take in an influx of a whole lot of kids all at one time without everything being kind of set up, and it's not set up right now, from what I understand, right?
Well, before major efforts are made to this regard, we need to create systems in place because if we do not, then we then inflict a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, and unsafety on those children in addition. So, and as I said, with a little bit of effort, these systems can be created to be safe and child appropriate. Bilateral agreements, if need be, can be signed with governments to be able to fast track this whole process in
Hmm.
terms of identity and age of verification and family reunification systems. The US government has supported many governments in terms of their national child protection systems. So, some of these efforts can be made for those that are returning, for example, so that they're not stuck in some facility somewhere in US where they don't speak the language, which may not be able to cater for their individual needs.
Right.
So, in reality, it is about sitting down, creating the architecture of a system that would work, ensuring cooperation of governments around the world with this system, and supporting them if need be for safe return of their citizens, children, wherever it is possible.
So right now in the US, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Where are kids going right now with what our current systems are?
So kids are going to facilities that have been in existence and such. Kids are also going to oftentimes unvetted people who become their guardians and such.
Hmm.
That's generally the system in place at the moment. Some are with their parents. So there are different combination of factors here
Hmm.
that are in play. But as I said, these need to be safe environments. So there needs to be a standard created for what it actually looks like
Hmm.
and a time frame.
Got it. When I want to kind of go back to the root of this because we're talking about reunification with their families of how an unaccompanied minor comes across the border to begin with. Um, we know of instances where a family member may have sold that child. Those are probably the worst of the worst, in my opinion. But there were also instances where they could have gotten separated from a family member in the journey to cross. Um, so let's just even speak to how a child gets unaccompanied. I mean, you deal with war-torn nations like Ukraine right now. It's really easy to understand how a child will get separated from a parent. Their parents may not even be alive anymore. But coming across the southern border, that's a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
No, some of the countries have high levels of violence as well. For
Okay.
example, where parents may have died. Sometimes they get separated by smugglers during the journey from one country to the next to the south border.
Okay.
So there are a lot of different things that may happen. Sometimes even when they're crossing the border, smugglers will separate them because they know children may potentially be able to stay or have a different level of treatment than adults would.
Okay.
And protections. So there are a number of different things that may happen actually in this regard. Or at other times, parents will pay smugglers to bring their child when they're in the country illegally, for example.
So when we say smugglers, we're not talking traffickers. We're talking about someone to bring someone or a child across the border illegally, which is what we're
Yeah,
talking
they
about here.
yeah, they call them coyotes essentially oftentimes. So yeah, somebody who knows how to cross the border and who could bring the children in.
Okay.
Hmm.
Thanks. That makes
And
a lot of
sometimes
sense.
and sometimes now they're using children as well because if a child gets caught doing this, smuggling others, they're less likely to face consequences, legal consequences.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things the smugglers do or the traffickers do is then they get probably the older children to then assist in the smuggling or the bringing of the kids over, right? And is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Hmm.
Okay. I'm just gonna go back to something I didn't mention in the beginning. That that really this is so near and dear to my heart. I was asked um, at the end of President Trump's first term if I would serve on a Department of Homeland Security national board. Congress set up funding for this board, and I was one of the people appointed to it. And and this board was designed by Congress to basically oversee funding. And let me just I want to make sure I'm saying this just right. To oversee U.S. funding for NGOs and governments for case management of migrants at the southern border. Now, I took that position because I was very concerned about the trafficking of children and women specifically because of my work at Enough is Enough. And unfortunately, all of us who were appointed to that board were fired. We were let go. The board was never set up by the Biden administration. And to my knowledge, I don't know that it ever was actually stood up by Congress, even though it was an act of Congress. And so I have followed this very closely because I sincerely believe that this board, like I said, this national board pilot program that was set up by Congress was really designed to have trusted people oversee where all the funding was going to these NGOs dealing with illegal immigrants coming into the country, not just, of course, unaccompanied minor children. So who knows if anything that we've seen could have been changed or different if that had actually gone through or been set up. But that's hopefully That board will get set up again under this administration, and that will also help to prevent some of the messes that we've seen down there. And I think the good news is that it does appear, at least from news reports, that the border is closing or is closed, and that the amount of people coming across, adults or children, has really been put to a, I won't say a halt completely, but has been severely stopped, thank God. So anyway, we're going to take a quick break right now. Tatiana, thank you so much. That is so much information, and but I think it's really hopeful that something can be done that is effective, that is going to take care of these children, that there are models in other countries that you've been involved in setting up. And so we know that this works. So we just want to thank everybody. We're going to take a really quick break, and we're going to do a little pivot when we come back, and we're going to talk about trafficking in our own backyard. And that our own children and grandchildren and the children in our lives as Americans aren't immune to trafficking. And how do we recognize it? What are the warning signs? And most of all, how do we prevent it? So thank you so much. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Donna Rice Hughes, and you have joined our podcast again after the first break at Internet Safety with Donna Rice Hughes. And we have a wonderful guest, Tatiana, and she is joining us from Switzerland, where she lives, even though she's an American. And she's worked all around the world fighting for the safety and the rights of women and children, particularly against violence and human trafficking. So Tatiana, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Over break, we were just talking about how important it is for the United States to get it right now. We have estimates of 500 to 600,000 missing children in the United States that have come through our open borders. This is tragic, and I believe it was highly preventable, but here we are. So we want to get the systems in place to effectively manage their care. And why don't you hit on that first, and then we're going to talk about trafficking in our own backyard, in our own communities, and possibly, God forbid, our own children.
Thank you so much, Donna. So yes, the issue is huge. There are various estimates, as you've mentioned, of 500 to 600,000 unaccompanied children who are now within the U.S. borders. If we were talking just about a couple of hundred kids, it would be easier to do something fast and quick where there's some monitoring in place and such. But when we were talking about such a large issue, we have to build the house right, meaning we need to build the right foundation and the right structure to be able to address, protect, and ensure the rights of these children and their safety in process. And if we actually build it right from the beginning, this will create a streamlined system that US can be proud of. US is known around the world as a country that stands for the rights of children, that protects children all around the world. So what we don't want to be is a nation that is now accused of abusing children or making them more vulnerable in process.
Right, and you say in process because you have suggested, and I totally agree, you want this to be a good, clean, quick process for these kids, and it's not right now. But in process, if the right systems are not in place, the kids can be further abused and exploited, and even en route to their country of origin. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Or upon arrival, etc. So this is where, with proper systems in place, that are working, and what we have discussed before is the referral system, where the child is identified, then the child is protected, in tandem, then, there's family tracking, the country of origin is notified, they quickly turn around the information that is necessary on the family, on identity and such. That actually creates a system in place that is workable. As I said, it needs to be, we have technology now, so technology can help a lot in this process. And then the will of countries of origin, as well as the political will within the US to get it right.
Right. Well, thank you. And I would just say that I hope everybody listening, and I will commit to do this, need to remember these kids in prayer. Because wherever they are right now in our country, many of them we believe are in the hands of traffickers and drug cartels. We can't even imagine the severe abuse that they're dealing with. And we just ask for their retrieval quickly, and for guidance for those with Homeland Security and other law enforcement agencies to be able to get them and rescue them just as soon as possible. So we're going to come right now to children in our own backyard. I just want to say something that if you've ever listened to me, you've heard me say it a million times. Well, not a million, because I haven't done that many podcasts, but that no child is immune to any form of exploitation or online exploitation. And particularly in our world now with the digital world and digital cartels, it's a term I'm going to use, there are crime syndicates, child pornographers, traffickers that are using the internet to exploit children and to exploit women. So what does that mean? That means that any child that is connected to the internet through any device, it can be their smartphone, their gaming device, their laptop, their school-issued computer. If they are connected to the internet, they're connected to all of the good and all of the good and safe people and the great content that's out there, but they're also connected to the bad folks, the toxic and harmful content, social media algorithms that are designed to pull them in and to keep them hooked and to put information in front of them that is harmful and toxic to their mental and emotional and even sexual health. So there's a lot going on right now, but we're going to stick on trafficking. Just a little data point, and that is over half of the cases of trafficking in the United States of a child involves the internet. So in other words, traffickers and groomers are using the internet to find kids and to groom them into trafficking or to groom them into some type of sexual exploitation situation. Now, when I say no child's immune, I did a podcast, one of my first actually ever, with a mom that lives in my neighborhood back in Virginia, and her name is Susan, and she told us the story of her daughter, who was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, who was trafficked while at school. While at school and living at home, she got involved with a young boy that the parents knew. They thought he was a nice kid. Turned out he was a gang member and got her in some compromising situations, photographed that, videotaped those compromising situations, and then blackmailed her into turning tricks after school, which she was doing for about 9 months before her parents figured out what was happening. So when I say, and this is a wonderful, lovely Christian traditional family, this was happening right under their nose, and they didn't know. They did not recognize the warning signs. So we're going to talk about warning signs. So let's, Tatiana, I'm going to come back to you. I kind of did a little grandstanding right there, but let's talk about what's happening right here in the United States and how what I call the cycle of abuse all fuels this problem of online exploitation. The cycle of abuse really is how child sex abuse material and the trafficking community, and they're all criminal, by the way, criminal operations and enterprises, and the online porn industry all feed one another. Do you want to speak to that? Let's just have a discussion about that first.
Sure. As you rightly said, pornography, human trafficking for sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse images, all of that are interrelated, and they exist for the basic point: there's profit to be made, massive, massive profit. And this profit is made first by exposing our children to very harmful content to normalize exploitation and abuse. So we're talking about pornography. And if we talk about pornography, 88% of all pornography is extremely violent. So children are watching scenes of torture, which are being normalized to them. Girls who are exposed to pornography are, and this is statistically, there have been studies done, are much more likely to be vulnerable to human trafficking and other forms of violence and exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
Boys then are more likely to then search for the same sex trafficking victims, or may create the demand for sex trafficking victims as a result.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about access, and technology, so technology is used to target, groom, and recruit victims of trafficking. And then it is also used for financial transactions, for advertisement to clients, for a variety of other purposes. So technology is a thread throughout the whole process. But when we talk about our kids, I remember being a kid myself, and it was stranger danger, right? Don't get
Mm-hmm.
into a car with a stranger. Don't talk to strangers on the street. Avoid, strange men. Don't get into any, environment where you're alone with a man, and then you're more or less okay. Now these strangers are entering our household.
Right.
Most of us cannot sit next to our child monitoring every single word they type into their smartphone, into their computer, into their gaming device. The fact is that traffickers now indiscriminately, traffickers, pimps, because there's also the lover boy technique, exactly what you have mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
previously in the exploitation of the girl. They're targeting our children. They know
Right.
everything there is to know about our children before they target them.
Right.
Because all of that is available on social media. So before that, it was very difficult for someone to figure out who's vulnerable, and they targeted specific
Mm-hmm.
populations. So homeless youth, youth from lower socioeconomic levels where there were parents with substance abuse issues or non-present or whatever else. So there were particular, categories of society that were particularly targeted by traffickers. Now it's everyone, because as you said, it's very, very easy to do so. And frankly, with 1% identification rates of victims of trafficking, much less in terms of prosecutions, it's a crime that has almost complete impunity. So they also know it.
Right. And so when we're talking about online grooming, for instance, a trafficker or a sexual predator. So I'm going to kind of, if you think of this as an umbrella of sexual exploitation, you have a predator who's a sexual predator. That person could be a pedophile that may not be a trafficker, but they use the same grooming techniques. But underneath a sexual predator would fall a trafficker, because they are a sexual predator, but they're engaged in the commercial trafficking, if you will, right, of humans, and women and children primarily. So, but in the grooming process, these predators and traffickers, they look for vulnerability, and that can be in even in an intact home. So in cases where they see a child may not feel like that person's understood, and maybe by their own parent, or have that trusted parent in their life where they feel like they can talk to, or maybe they just went through a recent breakup and they're sharing some of their feelings online. These groomers look for those types of vulnerability, and then they look to engage in an online conversation with this vulnerable child to gain their trust. This is part of the grooming process. To gain their trust, they may start sending them gifts. They will almost always, I've never seen an incident when this hasn't happened, Tatiana, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they must always introduce pornography and sex, and ask well, pornography's been introduced even prior to the internet, to actually sexualize a child, to then be sexualized to where they would engage in a sexual encounter with an adult, and that's happening online too. Often they will ask for pictures or nudes or videos of that child, and they use that content to silence the child, to blackmail them. Well, you can't tell anybody what's going on, or I'm going to expose your picture. And this whole thing just kind of goes around and goes around. And Tatiana, you mentioned that these are, and I mentioned, these are criminal enterprises. So when you look at the size of the child pornography industry worldwide, I mean, I've heard numbers as big as hundreds of billions of dollars. The same thing with the size of the trafficking industry. Even the pornography industry is huge. So one of the things that we have fought so hard for in the 30 years that I've been doing this at Enough is Enough is to get our existing laws in the United States aggressively enforced and funded, and they're not.
And I can tell you why this should be. Because frankly speaking, what we are known for is fighting terrorist networks and organized crime, which have a direct impact on democratic institutions, human rights, and protection of society as a whole. So when people purchase or participate in buying sex trafficking victims, the money goes where? To the same organized criminals, criminal networks or terrorist organizations that destabilize and threaten our society and our very own existence. So this is just something to actually really think of in these situations. When we're talking about trafficking for sexual exploitation, some of the latest figures are $99 billion a year in
Mm,
profit.
mm,
Pornography industry is much larger as well.
yeah.
When we're talking about children, oftentimes these children are not talking to who they think is a stranger. Somebody will enter their friend's network. They
Hmm.
think it's another child,
Hmm.
oftentimes. And those that are seeking to exploit children have the techniques, that they can use against a child of any age, any level of development, whether boy or girl. They know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
They psychoanalyze these children and target them very effectively to the point where the child will not even understand how they've sent a picture of themselves, but they have. And most of these children also cannot analyze the consequences of having a picture like that out there versus coming to their parents and saying, look, this has happened to me.
Hmm.
Please help me. Right? As an adult would, go report it somewhere, try to fight back or whatever. And then they're forced to provide more and more and
Hmm.
more. And
Right.
this is where you've seen a spat of suicides from teenagers and such who feel like they've gotten themselves in so deeply into this process that there's no way back for them. Because as I said, they're children. They
Right.
cannot analyze that this is bad, but they can get through this somehow.
Right. And they have been really terrorized with this whole problem of sextortion. We interviewed recently on this podcast Brandon Guffey, who shared the story of his son, who, in the course of a few hours, was sextorted online by a sextortionist, professional sextortionist folks that pretended to be a girl, asked him to send some nude pictures. He did. Turns out they tried to sextort him for money, and he panicked. It had a great relationship with his dad, but he panicked. He was scared. He took their threat seriously that they would expose his pictures and put it all over the internet. And he ended up shooting himself tragically. And this is not uncommon. So, these things are happening. And it's so important for anyone listening that your children and your grandchildren and the children in your circle aren't immune because, as you rightly said, Tatiana, these kids are kids. Their prefrontal cortex, just to get a little, medical science on you, is not fully developed. That's their reasoning capabilities. That's why God gave children parents. So they are easily manipulated and swayed and feared and buy into some of these lies. I want to speak to something else that you said about how clever these groomers are. I interviewed a convicted sex offender many years ago, and John Doe, and if you haven't seen this, just go to our YouTube channel at enough.org and go to the YouTube channel. You'll see John Doe's story. A convicted sex offender, but he talked about how he would pretend to be anybody that the kid wanted to know. So if he was grooming a a 13-year-old girl, and 13-year-old girl was into, surfers from California, he would find a picture of that and pretend to be that person and to gain her trust. And he would pretend to be a girl if he's talking to a guy. And so he just talked through this whole process. And so one of the things, and I want to get right to prevention and safety here next because we're going to wrap this up, is that one of the most important things for parents to tell your kids is that if you don't know the person that you've met online in the offline world, you can't be sure that they are who they say they are. And I always say you cannot detect a disguised predator. Right, Tatiana? You see this all the time.
Agree with you. So this is one point, but the second point is that you need to talk to your kids about never sharing
Mm-hmm.
naked pictures or anything that is sexualized about them with anyone ever, period. Even if it's a husband or wife, because then you can get a revenge situation as well going. So as a rule, you do not share any explicit material with anyone throughout your life. So if it's made as a rule and explained as to why, then there's less likelihood that a child would actually do so. And even if they do, a lot of times these children are attacked by parents. How could you do that? It's disgusting. We
Mm-hmm.
have raised you with a different set of values, etc. There needs to be an understanding that this child has been manipulated and
Mm-hmm.
exploited and abused. So
Mm-hmm.
you need to come to them from that point of view with compassion and love and support, because
Amen.
otherwise you're going to drive them more towards the same people that are exploiting them, because they will make them feel heard, loved, listened to, and such.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to come to them without judgment and the true understanding of what has happened to them, that this is such horrific violence to who they are, how much fear they have experienced, and the fact that they're not a bad child. They were just
Mm-hmm.
really taken advantage of.
That's right. And I'm so glad you said that. When we go through how to prevent this from happening in your own home, any of these crimes, the very first thing that we share is just what you shared. And that is, first of all, to never overreact or blame your child, to listen and to let them know you've got an open door policy. And not to shame them. And if you recognize that they are really sitting ducks to all these criminals and exploiters and groomers and pornographers that are just at them all the time, and it's coming at them from everywhere, and even sometimes from their peers with revenge porn or cyberbullying, and even the big tech companies who are grooming them through their algorithms to get hooked on this technology. So it's really it's tough out there, and I'm not going to go through all the ways to keep your kids safe from every single crime, but one of the best things you can do is have regular conversations with your children about what they're doing online. As soon as you let them online, whatever age, I don't recommend that they go online unless they have to at school until they're through middle school. There are phones you can get that aren't connected to the internet. You can set up your computer to where it's just content that you approve, because it's just really difficult for a child to navigate. But if you do let them online, our recommendation is that you turn on the filters on every internet enabled device. That will help keep out the negative content. They can still get around it, but it will help a lot. Turn on the monitoring technology. This will let you see where your kids are going, even view conversations that they may be having. If you said, no, you cannot have a Snapchat account, and they try to get one, you can see that through monitoring technology, and then also time monitoring controls. So these are just a few of the tools that a parent can use and should use. And Tatiana, you said something earlier about not giving out personal information or sharing any type of nude picture. I would say, in addition to that, don't share any personally identifiable information. What does that mean? Well, parents, you need to understand what it means until you can tell your child what it means. That means if you've got a kid who is playing football for his school team, be very careful that you're not sharing where that team is, or showing the stadium where he's playing, because that tells someone that child goes to that school and plays on that football team. Tatiana, do you want to speak to some of this importance of being very careful about personally identifiable information?
Absolutely. And now, this information actually creates a roadmap for whoever wants to exploit this child, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest. But now it's gotten even worse with AI. Any image of your child that you post online can end up in AI generated child sexual abuse materials. And it is being done now quite, in a quite pervasive manner. We have all seen the situation with Taylor Swift and an AI generated pornography that was produced, from her images. We have seen a spate of this, for example, in South Africa, where girls were targeted, schoolgirls actually, and child sexual abuse material was produced from their images. Some of them have, from what I understand, even committed suicide over it. And just last week in Europe, there was a big 19-country Europol-led operation to arrest over 200, I think over 200 perpetrators who produced child sexual abuse images.
Mm. Well, it's AI is. I mean, Pandora's already been out of the box for a very long time here. Just when the internet came into being, and the way these criminals and the sex industry basically were the forerunners of the moneymakers on the internet, and they still pretty much are. Now you add AI to this, and it's really messy and it's really dangerous. And I just want to encourage all of you parents to we're here at Enough is Enough to help you, to equip and empower you to be the first line of defense to protect your child. All right, because there's only so much the government can do, and in many instances, I'm not going to get into it right now, but you can hear this, on another podcast. But our laws aren't even being aggressively enforced and funded, and that's in particular the pornography laws. Tatiana, you talked about how 88% of the scenes in the pornography right now, most of it prosecutable under our current federal obscenity laws, depict some form of sexual violence against a female, against a woman, against a girl. So this shouldn't be, but it is, where I'm hoping that we can get those laws enforced now. But I want to just give you a few little conversation starters to have with your kids about just to deal with this topic of sexual predation online and trafficking. So the key is to have open conversations on a regular basis. So if your kids are online every day, talk to them about what they're doing online every day and come beside them rather than, did you this or did you that? So, you can say, hey, has anybody asked you for anything, personal, about yourself, where you go to school, how old you are, your likes or your dislikes, or have they ever said anything or talked to you about anything that makes you feel uncomfortable? Or have you seen that happen with one of your friends? I found that in talking to kids, Tatiana, one of the best ways to get them to open up, they may not want to tell you that they've seen pornography or you that they've sent a sex, but they may say, oh yeah, but my friend, right? So and that can just kind of get the ball rolling, so they feel like you're the safe person as their parent, that they can talk to you about all these things and just try not to overreact. Right, Tatiana?
Fully agree with you, Donna. And the thing is that the issue of pornography needs to be discussed. As uncomfortable as it is for us to sit down with our child to discuss it, because as you know, there are about 1 in 10 kids at 9 years old, 9-year-old boys, 1 in 10 access pornography, or pornography accesses them, and that just increases. So we're talking about majority of little kids who are actually watching this anyhow. So if we are not the ones having the conversation with them, those that are seeking to harm are.
Yes, and actually, it's even higher than that. There, kids are as young as 7, 8, 9 years old that are literally getting addicted and hooked on this stuff because it's out there, it's everywhere, and it's free. Okay, it's free. So, Tatiana, we could just go on, and you and I did when we first met, but we need to wrap this up. So, could you let people know how they can follow you and learn about your work?
Sure. I do quite a bit of work around the world. I actually keep off social media as much as possible. Following the advice that you have mentioned, but I do post quite a bit on LinkedIn, actually, the events I'm doing and information on some of these topics, because I believe all of us need to be safe, whether children or adults, when it comes to our online engagement.
Well, thank you, Tatiana, and you're probably smart to be off social media. I kind of have to because of this work. We've got social media accounts for Enough is Enough and for me. So please follow us on social media. And please, if you haven't already, sign up for our free newsletters. You can go to internetsafety101.org. A little screen will pop up and it'll just, you can put your name in and we'll send you updated information usually about every week. And it's about our issue, about what's happening in public policy, what's happening around the world, how to keep your kids safe. We always have tips. If you go to that same website, we have free guides. This one's on sex trafficking. This is the black and white version. But anyway, it's just, quick tips, warning signs, red flags, conversation starters, and how to protect your kids from traffickers. We have them on gaming. We have them on cyberbullying. Just if there's a way your kids can get into trouble online, we've got information for free at internetsafety101.org to help you protect your child and the children in your life. So, Tatiana, thank you so much. First of all, just thank you for the work you're doing around the world. I know it's not easy. You have suffered violence yourself because of your work, and yet you are a fearless warrior. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you so much for the incredible work you're doing to protect children as well, who are facing so many threats on a daily basis.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. And to everyone else, thank you for joining us. Please share this podcast and our other podcast with those that you think it could benefit. And in the words of one of my friends who just recently passed away, I'm going to leave you with her words of wisdom to me. And that is this: if you see someone without a smile today, give them one of yours. Thank you and God bless.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Internet Safety with Donna Rice Hughes, designed to educate, equip, and empower you to keep your children and family safe in the digital world. Until we talk again, have a beautiful and safe week.